Hi, my name is Elle Billing. I am a chronically ill queer femme, and I'm tired. I'm here this episode and every episode to dig at the roots of our collective fatigue, explore ways to direct our care in compassionate and sustainable ways, and harness creative expression to heal ourselves and our world. And welcome to HORF, Radical Care in a Late Capitalist Hexscape. My guest for this episode is Dan Watt. After 5 years in development at Columbia Pictures and 5 years working at SYCO, Simon Cowell's production company, Dan Watt decided to focus on stories exploring the human experience, humanity, spirituality, and social issues. He is the producer and director of the award-winning documentary Everybody Dance, currently on iTunes, Apple TV, and Amazon Prime. He was a producer on the award-winning film The Center, Gibbons and Guardians, featuring Jane Goodall. He also was the associate producer of the online doc series Wild Ride, following the Wildlife Generation pro cycling team across America and to China for 10 months. He is currently in production on an untitled documentary with Tony and Pulitzer Prize-winning producer Daryl Roth. Welcome to the podcast, Dan. Welcome to HORF, Dan. It's great to have you here. You might be the first guest I've had that reached out to me, as opposed to me reaching out first. And that was really exciting for me as a podcaster to have somebody be like, hey, I want to be on your podcast. I was like, yeah, I want you on my podcast. So I'm glad you're here today.
Yeah, and I'm so glad this worked out because I had listened to some of your podcasts. I had seen you pop up on Threads, and I'm always fascinated about conversation. There was just something about you and your posts that drew me towards you. So I thought I'm going to listen and see. And so I did. And I'm excited that it worked out and I'm here because I really, really like what you're putting out there.
Gosh, that was so nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people that's had to learn to accept compliments. So sometimes it just takes me a second to process. But I appreciate having you here today. So we've done quite a bit of emailing back and forth leading up to today. Usually we send a couple emails and then we just go with the questions that I've prepped. And you and I have actually emailed back and forth quite a bit getting ready for this, partly because, as we discussed in the emails, I'm disabled, and a lot of the people that I interview are disabled as well, or they're chronically ill, or they are, I guess I would say, sort of like in-group members who are talking about their own experiences. And this is a case where you were very upfront about the fact that you're an able-bodied person who made a documentary that featured people who were disabled. And so we were talking quite a bit about the lens and the framing of both your documentary and like the language that we use when talking about certain issues and about people. And the way that you mentioned it in one of your emails was, we both come from the LGBTQ community, and our language for ourselves is always evolving too. And sometimes when we talk about ourselves within community, it's different than when other people talk about us. And it's always a learning experience. And so there can be some gentleness and grace when people use words that they're trying to use correctly, but may not be the right ones anymore.
Yeah, and it's ever changing, and like you said, in different communities, different people accept different words. Different people, a word might rub them the wrong way, or doesn't work for them. So I wanted to make sure that you and I discussed that because am I an able person? Am I an able-bodied person? It's everybody refers to it differently, and I just wanted to make sure we presented the best we could.
Right. And I really appreciated that. And as far as I'm concerned, I've used all of those terms. I've used abled, able-bodied, non-disabled. My friend Andrew, who was on an episode that came out in February, he uses the word pre-disabled because the way he frames it is, if we're lucky, everyone lives long enough to become disabled.
Ah,
because with age, we begin to lose some of our abilities and faculties. So, I mean, I think about my mom who wasn't disabled, but now she has a progressive illness and it has disabled her. So she actually the other day she was like, it's just so bad when you have to have your daughter do these things for you because I'm her caregiver. And I said, it's not bad, mom. It's just the way it is. And I even said, I said, you know what my friend Andrew says? My friend Andrew says that if we're lucky, we all live long enough to become disabled. Statistically, 20 to 25% of the population is disabled at any given time. As we age, it's a natural part of life. I think part of our work as disabled people or people with disability or however we choose to identify is like we spend a lot of time working on the stigma of that, both in ourselves, the internalized ableism, but also like addressing the ableism that other people have towards us. Because
right.
disabled isn't a dirty word. I think someone in the documentary even said that.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like it doesn't have to be scary. It can be.
Correct. And it is being at the moment being able bodied. I wanted to make sure in the movie that I presented everybody. Well, I didn't want to present them. I don't even like saying that now that I said it. I what I did is I wanted to give them a platform,
Mm,
and I wanted them to tell their stories because I wanted it to educate me and the audience. So I'm hoping that that came across, but it is like you said, having the parents talk about it, what their
mhm,
lives were, you know, or
mhm,
are raising these kids and what the kids go through. It's interesting. It's exactly what you're explaining with your life and what your circumstances are and how they changed because now your mom can't do everything on her own like she used to be able to. I went through the same thing with my parents when they got older,
mhm,
and then my mom ended up going to an assisted living facility. So it's we are constantly changing and constantly being exposed to different circumstances, and it's
mhm.
just how we accept that and adjust to it.
Right. So we've mentioned the documentary a couple of times. Your documentary is called Everybody Dance, and through the end of March, it is available streaming for free on Amazon Prime.
Correct.
Will it still be on Prime after that?
Yeah, it still will, and I'm hoping because they put it up last week, so it actually went up earlier, like 10 days before they said they were going to do it. So I've told a lot of people, and they emailed me and said how excited they were with the response because March is known as Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. So we
Hmm.
connected the two, and they offered it for free. So it's I'm excited, and they made it sound that because of the response just through word of mouth like
Hmm.
this, they might extend it, and I just
Okay.
think that that's a great thing. And it's also on, iTunes and YouTube. You can buy it and Apple TV, but
Oh,
if you can
great.
see it on Prime Video for free, why not?
Right. Yeah. So the film is called Everybody Dance. And I normally ask a different question first, but I'm going to save it to the end and just flip the order of the questions. So, because people who have listened to my podcast before, they're going to say, hey, you missed the first question. I'll get to it. Um, so, what was your initial idea for the documentary and why did you decide, and how did you decide to make this? You've made other documentaries before, but
Yeah.
how did you decide to make this particular film, which is about a ballet studio, Ballet for All Kids,
Yes.
which is an inclusive ballet studio, provides ballet lessons for individuals with disabilities.
My first idea was that I wanted to do a documentary about the arts and how people who have studied the arts when they were younger because your parents made you take piano lessons or tap or singing in the choir and you didn't make a career out of it. Did you learn anything from that, and how did you apply that in your everyday life? That was my initial goal going in because I was a dancer when I was younger, but I was able to make a career out of it. So I wasn't sure how I was going to get into the movie, but I knew that big broad base.
Hmm.
And then I had a dream, and I usually don't remember my dreams, but this was so vivid. And it was of two girls that I taught. And now we're talking like 18, 20 years ago. And both of the girls had autism. And I had a dream about them and their mother, Fran. And I was like, well, that's weird. Why am I dreaming about Fran and her two daughters? And I didn't give it much thought. And then 2 weeks later, I had a dream about them again. And I thought, I need to pay attention to this. This is God poking me, saying, this is your movie, asshole.
Hmm.
I am giving you the way in. You don't have to think
Yeah.
anymore. Here it is.
Like, stop making it so difficult. Like,
Right. And I thought, you know what? I need to trust this because honest, I don't remember my dreams or they're never that vivid. And I thought this is a message coming to me and I'm open, investigate it and see where it goes. So I did research online and checked all across the country, all across
Mhm.
America, trying to find a conservatory because it didn't have to be dance. I wanted it to be something with the arts, but I would lean toward dance because I grew up in that world.
Mhm.
And I found that so many studios and colleges and conservatories, which was disheartening, a lot of them taught dance, but they taught 15 minutes. And then the rest of the hour was like a freestyle jungle gym, and it looked more like a babysitting service. So the parents could just put their kids in it and go do their shopping. And I thought, that's not the story. There's got to be a place. And then I found Ballet for All Kids, which was in California. And I avoided California because I thought California is going to be so Hollywood. There's not going to be a school like this out here because it's Hollywood. Who would do that? They're
Mhm.
going to train for, the backup dancers for Jennifer Lopez. I, and there I found her in the valley. And I emailed her a few times and I talked to her. We talked many times because I wanted to make sure she was comfortable and the families were comfortable. But
Mhm.
she teaches a full 50-minute dance class, and it is the exact same format of the ballet classes that I took. You do all the bar work, you do the stuff in the center of the floor, and then you learn a combination. So these kids are getting the benefits of a full class. And I thought, yeah, this is the place.
And it was evident through the documentary as I was watching it that the way she teaches is it's dance. Like, it's like you said, the full. I mean, I don't know ballet. Like, and so I didn't understand the ballet parts that she was doing. I was like, "Oh, this is like real dance stuff." But she it's adapted and the pace is different, and she's meeting each kid, each dancer at the level that they need to access the curriculum. So, where and the one there was I can't remember the names of the kids now and I didn't write them down. There was the one student who said, "At school I don't really feel like I fit in, but at dance that's where I belong."
Liam,
And
yeah.
yeah, it wasn't just an access point for him to learn to dance, it was an access point for him to find other people he could belong with. And the way that she explained the dance instructions and the way she broke things down for the students was always at a digestible level, but it wasn't like infantilizing, and it wasn't in a way that talked down to them. Like she met them at their level.
Right. And that's the gift that Bonnie has. She never dumbed it down and talked down to them. And I don't want your audience, I want to make sure your audience and all the audiences know, yes, dance is in the title, but it is exactly what you just said, where Liam got to find people, like-minded people. It is about community, it is about friendship, it is about self-identity, it is about self-love, awareness. It's about all those things. All these kids just happen to take at the same dance studio. So that's the common thread, and we just follow them towards their recital. But the reason that I fell in love with Bonnie, and I'm still friends with her and a lot of the parents, is exactly what you said, is she gives visual aids so that you don't need you don't need to know all the ballet terms. You don't need to know what an échappé is. That's when she showed the scissors and she opened
Mm-hmm.
the scissors and closed them. So the nonverbal boy that she was talking to, he then could use his vision to know what to do. And he
Right.
just then what he did is he mimicked what she did with those 4 foot
Mm-hmm.
wood scissors that she had made. So then she opened the scissors and closed the scissors, and that's what he did with his legs. So she
Right.
put so much time and effort into thinking of the curriculum, and her goal is to meet you at your level or and your access point. And that's what's so great about the school. And the one thing about the school is all the volunteers that you saw there. Each child in the class has a volunteer who has studied dance and is a dancer, a dance student somewhere, and they volunteer their time to work with each one of these children to help Bonnie and assist on what that child needs at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
To physically move their arms to mimic and match. And you just think, look at how all this love is in this room, and all these people, this community came together, and these kids that do the volunteerism, they might have to do 10 weeks to get, credit at school, but they stay for 4 years. Some of them
Right.
went to college and then came back. So it's the movie is so much bigger than dance.
Mm-hmm.
I just found her curriculum and the way she did it amazing. And I'm hoping it came across to you.
I usually interview disabled folks directly, and this is one of the exceptions. At least this episode is. I'm disabled now, but I wasn't when I first started working in the field of deaf education and special education, and then I acquired a disability during my career. And I found, like, while I was working in the field, and especially when I got on, before Twitter became X, and while it was still like a functional ecosystem, I learned a lot from disability Twitter. Talking about disability, the in group, out group, people being subjects of a film versus objects, just things like that. There's a lot of complexity involved there. My question is, you mentioned too, is that you didn't want to present the kids in the film. You wanted to provide the platform for them to tell their own story. And I'm just wondering, like, how you were able to work with Bonnie and the dancers and their parents to be able to balance the storytelling among all of those voices so that the kids were really still the ones telling the story about their experience with dancing.
Right. I gave it a lot of thought, and so did Bonnie. And her and I talked many, many times about this because I wanted to deliver the film that I saw in my head, and I just
Mhm.
wanted to make sure, like you just talked about, I didn't want them to be the subject that I'm showing. And it was
Mhm.
like, how do I capture that? And that's when I started talking to the parents, and I said, I think the best way to make this happen is there a way, will you open up your home life to me? Will
Mhm.
you open up your lives? And so many of them, like Liam's parents, said of course, because they wanted to tell the story, because they felt that it isn't done enough, that
Mhm.
enough people do, I told them that I wanted to learn, and just having conversations with Bonnie and going to the studio twice before we even filmed, I learned so much
Mhm.
just by being there. And I said, I want to make sure that I get that message across. What is it that you want to say? You tell me what you want me to know and the world to know. And we went about it that way because I wanted, again, but also I wanted to know, why is Liam still taking ballet for 4 years? And it would not just because of the camaraderie and the friends he had there and he felt part of, but he did take stuff, and the family took stuff from class and applied it in their everyday lives, which actually reflects back to what my original concept was that keeping him on a routine
Hmm.
at home as well as the dance studio, and putting signs up around the house to remind him. And the mom would say, like in dance, this is the first part you do, this is the second part. So when he would come home from school, it was, okay, hang up your backpack here, put your dirty containers from your school lunch
Hmm.
in the sink, put this back in the refrigerator. And they made it like a routine in a dance at home. So when he walked in, it was boom, 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 boom.
Right. And so that impact of being involved in the arts like generalized and transferred into his everyday life, which is what your original idea was. Yep.
Right. So it was great that and for them to share that with me. And Ailey, who I love, is the one who had that little afro.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
the girl with perfect pitch.
is she? Yes, is she not? And I'm still friends with her and her mom. I just fell in love with that girl,
Mhm.
and just to see that she has, the autism spectrum. Bonnie says this: if you know someone with autism, you know one person with autism,
Yep.
because the
It's
spectrum is so vast.
it really is. Yep.
And that is a huge learning curve that I had to learn while filming. So a lot of it, I had to adjust every day to what was going on. Oh, here's a
Mhm.
perfect example. I can't believe I forgot about this. The first day we showed up to film, before I took this adventure on, I worked for Columbia Pictures, where,
Mhm.
I had access to anything I wanted. It was a phone call away. But now I had to put my crew together and go there, and I'm like, oh, I have 3 cameras. We're going to film from every angle, and it's just going to be brilliant and fabulous. And then you go into that room, and those kids went crazy. It,
As a teacher, I'm like, "Yeah, you put a camera in a room of kids.
right,
Like,
right.
what do you
Well, and
think is gonna happen?"
I brought 3 and a microphone, and the boom mic and lighting, and I was like, whoa. And in 5 minutes, I told them all to leave the studio. I was like, what were
Yeah.
you thinking, Dan? What did
Yeah.
you think
Yeah,
that
like,
was? I know.
yeah, I actually thought about that while I was watching. I was like, I wonder how Dan made this work, because I know how kids act around cameras.
Well, yeah, exactly. And there I was with my Columbia Pictures mind hat on, going, this is going to be spectacular, and I'll get it from the ceiling in every angle. And it
and
ended up
and then there's like this disembodied narrator. It was
right.
not spectacular. No, it turned out it did. It looks great. But I was actually curious how that worked out, because I'm like, that one studio doesn't look very big, and those kids are moving around a lot.
It took about 5 minutes, and I told everybody, I said, go outside in the parking lot. I told my entire crew, I said, get out. And I went out there and I said, we got to figure out how to do this. And the one cameraman, Ben, said, well, let me just carry the camera on my shoulder. And Ben had gone up there one of the times with me before we filmed, so him and I could talk and figure out our landscape and what we were going to do. And then what we did is Ben and I didn't film that day. We sat in the studio. And I said, these kids need to get used to us being here.
Yep.
And then we went back the following week and just sat there. So then they would come in and say hi,
Hmm.
or give us a hug, or just walk by like, I don't care who you are, like any class. It has nothing to do with ability or disability. That's just kids. So
Yes.
once they got used to our physical being in there, and we couldn't use the boom mic because they all thought it was caterpillars and wanted to pet it. So we had to take the fuzzy boom mic out of it. We just mic'd Bonnie with the lavalier mic, and we put some around the studio and on the camera. And
Hmm.
then we just had to then I had to switch my entire idea of filming it. And then it just turned into a rogue style run and gun, they call it in the business, type of shooting, where Ben just had it on his shoulder and
Hmm.
walked wherever the kids weren't. If the kids were coming to the left, he would just step back and go to the right. And we just had to adjust to whatever they were doing. And there's one or two parts where there's that one part where a girl gets overwhelmed in class and starts to laugh and leaves the studio.
Mhm.
And she runs out of the studio and she hits him. Well, I wanted that story in there because the classroom and learning the choreography, again, like any dance studio, because I've learned it and you become overwhelmed when you're like, oh my gosh, this is my sixth number. She got overwhelmed and had to leave. And her coping mechanism is to laugh. Well, the laugh disrupted the class, so that she left.
Mhm.
But I talked to her mom and dad first. This goes back to your question too. I said, I think this is important for the audience to see that this is a coping mechanism of someone on the autism spectrum. And
Mhm.
can I use it? And the parents agreed. So I was very conscious about things like that, where I thought it might be great to expose this coping mechanism,
Mhm.
and attached to stemming and all that kind of stuff, that this could help. But I wanted to make sure the parents were okay with it because I didn't want it to turn into an embarrassing moment for the daughter.
Right. Were you able to ask the daughter how she felt about, or the student, how she felt about having it in the film?
We pulled it back up on the camera
Mhm.
at the studio after everybody had left, and Bonnie was there with us, and we showed it to her, and she clapped. She thought she was the star of the movie, she felt,
Oh, okay.
because she had a close up.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so it didn't bother her, and the parents agreed that they felt it could be a learning tool that they thought the world should see.
Mhm.
Well,
You know,
it's like a shy kid that, hides under your arm or
oh, yeah.
hides, everybody has different coping
Oh,
mechanism.
absolutely. Yeah.
Hers is just to laugh.
Yeah. Going back to when you said how Bonnie said you've met one person with autism or one autistic person, you know exactly one person who has
Right.
autism, and how some of the parents really wanted to tell their story. I think it was Liam's parents who, when he was diagnosed, it was his dad was like, "Oh, this is what autism can look like too." Like he had a different idea of what autism and or what an autistic child looked like. And so when Liam got his diagnosis, was that Liam's dad?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, okay. And so when he was diagnosed, his dad just for him, there was that steep learning curve too of, "Oh, it can look like this too."
correct.
And trying and figuring out what it was gonna look like for their family too. And I thought that was really interesting, to include because, again, there were several autistic students or in the movie, and each of them was a very diverse representation of the spectrum, and each of them accessed the dance class differently, and their families all had a different story, but each of them were involved, like very fully involved in the program. And I think it really provided a great arts opportunity for them, but it also, in like the way that you presented it in the film, it really did show that, like, there's this whole spectrum that people don't necessarily realize is autism, and all of it is valid, and all of it needs support, and all of it needs inclusion. But you also didn't limit your film just to kids with autism. Like,
Right.
there were other students interspersed in there, and I really appreciated that you included all of that.
Well, and I actually, in the first 2 months, we filmed broader, big shots of the classes and the
Mhm.
routines and all that, because then I was taking notes of what personalities were popping out.
Oh, there were some great personalities.
Oh,
Oh,
exactly. There
I love
there
kids.
yeah, there are. There just so many are amazing. But the reality is I'm making a movie, so we also needed to then decide whose story arc works. So we went from everybody, then I
Mhm,
narrowed it down to, I think, 13,
mhm.
and then I narrowed it down to, like, 11, because then sometimes when you interview the parents, they'll say, "Sure, not a problem, come on over," and then you ask them a question, their answer is yes, and you're like, "Okay.
Tell
So
me
can you tell
more.
me a little bit more about Ella?" "Yeah, she's nice." "Okay."
Yeah.
And it their intentions were good, but they just don't know how to tell a story or be open enough. They felt
Mhm.
uncomfortable even though they wanted to be.
And that's totally valid too. Some people just aren't comfortable on camera. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's again, like anything. My sister hates to talk in front of people and her voice goes up 5 octaves, you know. And she talks really, really fast like a munchkin. Not a munchkin,
That's
a chipmunk.
that's funny. My sister's autistic. I actually interviewed her last season about both of us grew up undiagnosed and were diagnosed neurodivergent in our late 30s. And so we were talking about what it's like to get a diagnosis in adulthood. And like all of a sudden our childhood makes sense. And one of her coping mechanisms is to be a storyteller. So she has like the opposite of your sister, where like her coping mechanism is stage presence.
Oh,
Like
excellent.
that's how she has coped with life.
Oh, that's
So
great. I'll have to look
yeah.
that interview up. I watched your last or listened to your last 5, so I'll have to go and track her
Yeah, it
down.
was at the end of towards the end of the first season. We talked
Okay.
about it's called It's Not a Quirk, It's a Symptom.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
that's funny. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, her
Well,
big coping thing is like she performs life basically. It's and so the last couple years have been really interesting to deconstruct that.
I'm excited to listen to it. To get back to where we were in
Yeah, I'm
regards to
sorry.
the time. No, that's okay. No, 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 because I love that. I
That's my
love that story.
ADHD.
But it also shows that there's even again, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism because now
Right.
you just exposed a completely different personality trait in
Yeah.
someone else. Um, but I fell in love with these kids because I was up
Oh,
there
yeah.
every weekend, and I there's no way I could decide. And I knew I wanted Liam in it, but did I want Liam in it because I fell in love with Liam because here's a boy who's studying dance and being one of the only boys who danced in Cleveland, am I is there a story there or am I just, oh good, another boy who takes dance? So
Yeah.
I gave all the footage to my editor and I said, and I had to trust him. I said, you know what? I'd use them all, but I know that's not possible. So will you please watch the stories and tell me? And then he narrowed it down to 7. And from that 7, we narrowed it down from there. But then again, you have to be open to what's going on and be present because there's the girl in the film called Breezy.
Mhm.
She's older, and I didn't think I was going to focus on her and her family in the beginning. And then I saw her at the rehearsal the night before the show, and she was center stage tap dancing, and her smile and the excitement that oozed out of her was
Mm,
overwhelming. And I thought, this girl is having the time of her life.
mhm,
And she just didn't give a hoot. And she did the dance, and she was so good that they put her front and center so everybody could follow her if they weren't sure what to do.
mhm,
And I thought that radiant personality on stage, she didn't have it in the classroom, but she had it on stage. So
mhm.
then I went back and watched footage of her in the classroom and thought, I think I need to tell this story because look at her after 10 months, look what she accomplished and how much fun she was having and the joy of being there like any performer, that
Yeah.
she wanted to be up there. Again, there were the ones that laid down on the floor and cried because they didn't want to be in front of an audience. But
Yeah.
again, my
That's
nephew did
kids.
the same thing.
That's kids, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to get such terrible stage fright when I was a kid that I'd get like gastrointestinal distress the day of like piano recitals or plays or whatever. And like it was really bad. Like
Yep.
every single time and the thing is I love performing, but it was just like the anticipation of it would make me physically ill. Like
Right.
the day of a performance. Yep. And my dad and I both have this thing where like our hands get freezing cold like right before we have to go on stage. It's just like we lose circulation in our fingers. Yeah, our hands get cold.
Yeah, my feet get cold. I never thought about that, but I always have on like 2 pair of socks before I used to perform, and then I'd have to take them off to go on stage,
Yeah.
because they don't fit in your jazz shoes. But I always have, that's interesting. I need to look into that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just people. Like
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
we
And I
all have
like
different
performing.
responses to fear.
Right. Yeah.
It's the terror of being seen. So we're getting close to the end. And so I did say that I would flip my questions. So the question I usually ask at the beginning, but I saved for the end because we jumped right into the documentary, was how have you received care this week?
This, well, I will say that the most recent care I received was getting that question from you 3 days ago,
Oh.
because it made me reflect. First of all, it's a question that I think everyone needs to ask themselves, and they need to do it on a regular basis, because there's so many different types of care. And what we need to do is be able to recognize it. And because
Mhm.
to me, there's physical care, there's mental, and there's emotional care. And we need to be open to see it in ourselves and be willing to see it. And then what do we do about it? So when you asked that, you sent me that question, I thought, well, how does this relate to me? The first thing that popped into my head was when my mom went to, her assisted living, and I'm like, well, no, that was me helping her. So how does it, but connected to that was there were times that I had to step back and take care of myself so that I could take care of her. But it also
Mhm.
goes back to the self-care part in regards to realizing and recognizing and the thoughts that pop into your head and make you feel guilty
Mm,
that
mhm.
you decide to take a day off. And because of the profession that I grew up in or chose to do, we never took a day off, because you book a job in your job. Say I'm choreographing the show Oklahoma, so I'm past my dance career and I'm now a choreographer. Okay, that's January through April. Well, in February, you have to look for the job that starts in May or maybe in April, because so you're always ahead, 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 and you're always looking and going and chasing and doing the next thing and the next thing and the
Yeah.
next thing, but your body can't keep up. Your brain can't keep up, and you need to be able to shut down. And I read in a book somewhere to look at your brain as if it's a computer
Mhm.
and you have all those files. And so you need to sometimes you need to shut down a file or a program to open up another one. And if you think of it that way, that just resonated with me visually, that I can go, oh, you need to shut these down. Your computer needs to be turned off, needs to power down today. That's what he said, needs to power down so that it'll be ready for you tomorrow or the next day. And your question made me dig out all those books I used to read when I was going through trying to figure out what to do with my life. Why am I running so much? Why am I always chasing, 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 chasing? And then you're not enjoying the moment you're in because you're chasing the next one.
Mhm.
And I spent a lot of time on that and trying to change that thought process. And I think 85% of the time I can do it. But you asking that question made me dig out books
Oh, wow.
and reread some of the passages that helped me get more clear and more focused. So I have to thank you for giving me the care I needed this week, because it brought me back to a place that I haven't been to in a couple months, and I really needed to get back here. So that goes back to, I don't think we talked about it here. I think we talked about it in an email. You meet the people you need to meet when you need to meet them.
Yep, and if you're paying attention, the
Right,
right people cross your path.
right.
Yep.
And
That was in our email last night.
yeah, and here we are,
Here we are.
so I reached
Thank
out to you because there was something about you and what you were posting and what you did, and I thought, yeah, I want to talk to her. And if it goes somewhere, fine. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But, you know, if I wouldn't have reached out to you, I wouldn't have gotten. And that's another thing. When you're doing self care, you need to reach out for help and be
Mhm.
able to accept it. And I did not know that I was going to get the self-help I needed by reaching out to you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. There's
Yeah.
something you said towards the beginning of that answer that reminded me of the thing that I tell my friends when they're feeling guilty about taking time off or taking a break, is that you have to put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. And I say that all the time and still sometimes forget to do that myself. So,
Yeah.
so I really appreciate your answer, and specifically that you mentioned your mother, because I've been in my feelings this week about some of my own caregiving duties. And so thank you.
Hmm.
I really appreciate having you here today. Um, Thank you for sharing your documentary with us. I will put the links to it in the show notes, so everybody can watch Everybody Dance, a Dance and Dan production.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time.
And I appreciate you, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of HORF. To view the complete show notes and all the links mentioned in today's episode, or to get a full transcript of the episode, visit hoorfpodcast.com. That's HOORF podcast.com. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they're released. And if you're enjoying our podcast, I'd love to have you leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. Reviews are one of the major ways that Apple ranks their podcasts, so even though it only takes you a few seconds, it really does make a difference for us. Become a patron. For $3 a month, you can support the creation of this podcast, pay my editor, and join a community of fellow caregivers out here just doing our best. Thank you again for joining me, Elle Billing, in this episode of HORF. Until next time, be excellent to each other. HORF is hosted by Elle Billing at Elle and Wink. Audio editing by Ricky Cummings at Ricky Poo. Music composed by Ricky Cummings. HORF is a production of Elle and Wink Art Studio, all rights reserved. HORF Podcast can be found on social media channels at HORF Podcast, at HOORF Podcast.
This is your movie, asshole. I am giving you the way in.